to The Big Interview. I'm Graham Hunter. Kind of you to join us. I'm happy that you're here. More chat about football and life. This episode, number 98 in our interview series in The Big 98. You beauty. This is with John Hartson. Beyond being a very successful footballer and somebody who has been tested by life, John stuck in my consciousness ever since 95, 96, when I moved from being a part-time journalist to a full-time football journalist, and I was flying back from Turin with Tommy Burns, then the Celtic manager, having taken him on a 3-day trip to visit Marcello Lippi and Pietro Ventroni, the fitness trainer at Juventus. And on the flight back, Tommy was giving me an interview, and he said off the record, as Celtic manager, he was desperate to sign John Hartson. And I'll admit, at that time it startled me. I couldn't quite see why this, John calls himself a raging bull at that age, a patently talented but not refined striker coming through at Arsenal, having made his mark at Luton, was so attractive to Tommy Burns, a man who'd shown real astuteness in signing for his club, George Cadet and Andy Tom and Paolo Di Canio, etc. So I began to follow John. I began to speak to people who knew him at that early age, and throughout his career I have thought that he's something of an underestimated footballer. I ended up in one of the Celtic Barcelona ties working for STV as a summariser alongside John, and I found him to be not only friendly and helpful, but a really interesting guy. This was recorded remotely from John's place south of Edinburgh and my apartment cum detention centre here in Barcelona. There's lots to like here, I'd say, but I recommend that you listen out for a description of John's apprenticeship at Luton under Mick Harford. Mick is a legendary figure in the game, and whether you've heard of him, whether you watched him, whether you feared him, or whether you don't know who Mick Harford is, John's description of the guy he had to go and work for and how bad he could be, to other people, not John, takes you right back to the apprenticeship system and gives you a brilliant portrait of Mick Harford. John begins by talking about his most testing centre-half opponent, somebody who will probably surprise you, somebody who wasn't John's size, and somebody who, when John looked at him in the tunnel at Mestalla in Valencia, thought, aye, tonight's going to be a piece of cake. And it wasn't. This episode contains details of the run Celtic had to the UEFA Cup final in 2003, and moreover, the difficulty of facing the fact that that famous team won nothing that season while Rangers won a treble. Difficulty for him and his fellow players. Once we get to the section, particularly around John missing a penalty in the CIS Cup final and then going to Anfield and worrying about how he'd be received, the sound quality isn't what we would normally hope for. Anyway, John Hartson is engaging, interesting and funny. Enjoy. So listeners, hello, this is the big interview in detention. Dear listeners everywhere, I don't know what I did. I didn't look at the teacher in a bad way. I've never had detention that lasted this long in my life before. But one of the things that's bright, when you're in detention and the classroom's all stuffy and it's 4:45 and you want to go home, one of your mates comes to the window and just pushes his nose against the window and makes you laugh. We've got one of those. The man who talked me through only my second appearance on the Parkhead pitch, which was as a quivering reporter for Celtic versus Barcelona. And I had Mr. John Hartson to my right-hand side. He talked me through the whole game and the whole performance. John, thank you for coming and rescuing the big interview from detention. It's generous of you.
You're more than welcome, Graham. I've always wanted. I've watched you over the years doing several interviews and podcasts, and I've seen you at regular places, games and everything. But this is one of the first times we get to have a really good football chat. I'm looking forward to it.
And still, you subject yourself to this. That means you're a strong man. If you've seen me before, then it was an excuse to run and say, rubber here, lads. John, look, everybody that's listening knows the basis of this interview. And I want to test you a little bit, because I think I know the answer to the question, but I'd like a description. Because, John, in this interview, what we've often done is we've taken specialists in their position and we've asked them about their art. Now, I think that of all the central defenders that were beaten by you, bullied by you, outthought by you, outjumped by you, tricked by you, you've said in the past that it was a wee guy with lanky long hair who was at least one of your toughest central defence opponents, and that was Roberto Ayala. El Raton, he was called, the Mouse. Can you believe he was called the Mouse? John, that was Celtic against Valencia in the year before your run to a third European final on your part. Please, for those who don't understand Ayala or the art of a centre-forward against a central defender, why did you name Ayala as your trickiest opponent? Describe him and the situation, will you?
Well, first of all, that was against Rafa Benitez's Valencia in the Champions League, the group stages. This was the game. Can't recall what year.
It's December 2001, and as you say, it's a home and away tie in the group stage. And I mean, look, just for everybody else, there was no test of memory for you. Valencia line up with Canizares, Pellegrino, Fabio Aurelio, the man, Roberto Ayala, Miroslav Djukic, the sweeper, Amadeo Carboni, brutal, hard Italian fullback, Curo Torres, Vicente, the brilliant winger, Pablo Aimar, Gonzalo de los Santos, John Carew, they had Anglama and Mista on the bench, and Rafa Benitez was the coach. You're right, John. But it was that battle with Ayala that why was he such a tough opponent?
Well, the reason for that, Graham, was I generally had really good success as a centre-forward against players of the ilk, let's just say, for argument's sake, Gareth Southgate, Chris Perry, Jamie Carragher, players that couldn't match me physically for my strength. And I could bully them. I could roll them. I'd win almost every header that came into me. They couldn't get around me. And I looked across at the tunnel. I was in the tunnel that night against Valencia at the Mestalla. And I remember Valencia had the white kit, didn't they, with the black shorts. And I'm looking at Ayala, and I'm honestly thinking to myself, I'll be all right tonight. I'll be fine. I thought, I'm bigger than him. I'm stronger than him. Play it into me. I'll beat him in the air. I'll roll him. I'll bully him. And from the first minute, he was up for the challenge. He was like a rock. He was so hard and strong. For somebody who was about 5'9", 5'10", he outjumped me. Whenever I sort of tried to bully him, he was giving it as much back. Great defender. He was toe-poking the ball. If I tried to get hold of it, he would put his foot through the middle of my legs, poke it away. If he couldn't win it, in front of me, he'd try and get his body on his legs in and around the ball, so he'd make it messy for me as a striker to get a hold of it and link play. And I was just incredibly impressed with him. And I come off that night, and we got beat 1-0. If it hadn't been for Rab Douglas, actually, it would have been 6 or 7. They were an unbelievable side. Pellegrino alongside him, by the way, he must have been 6'6". So that was another, a physical sort of battle that I had. I remember Aimar, what a player he was.
Fabulous.
Incredible. A little bit like David Silva, wasn't he? That type of player. Could thread balls through with the correct weight and set things up, and just very, very good on the ball, took it, brave. But Roberto Ayala, I always say, Graham, because the ones I generally struggled against were Steve Bruce, Neil Ruddock, Gary Pallister, Dave Watson, defenders who could match me physically, because they were tough, they were strong. And back then, when I was coming through, I signed for Arsenal 25, 26 years ago now. So in the late sort of 90s, the referee would say, John, keep your elbows down, and he'd give me one, he'd give me a free kick, and then 5 minutes later he'd give it against me. And I could say to the ref, come on, ref, any chance? And he'd wink at me, he'd say, you get the next one. So there was physical battles going on all over the pitch, but it was the big physical centre halves who were same weight as me, had the same presence as I did. And then I felt the smaller ones, it was an easy day for me because I was so strong. And that's why I built my career on backing in and holding. But that night in Valencia against Roberto Ayala, he didn't allow me to do that. And I was surprised that he was so good for someone that was so small. He could jump, physically strong, he was quicker, and he was just outstanding. I just had a really difficult night against him.
There's a phrase here, John, in Spain, which is called mala leche. And it's daft. It's like a lot of Spanish. It doesn't translate really well because it just means bad milk. But we would say that somebody was a bad bugger. How much within you, because you've used the phrase bully a lot there, and I think part of that is sports bullying in terms of making sure that psychologically you dominate them. If there's a physical edge, proving it. But there's another side to a centre-half, centre-forward battle. The mala leche, the bad bugger part, sometimes it would go off between a striker and a centre-half. Did you have that nastiness inside you naturally?
Well, I was what you would call a physical header of the ball. I would get across people and I would almost get a 1, 2, 3, get a jump, and then my knee would go into the side of the defender, and I wouldn't just win the header, I would win the header at ease. I would get so far above them, and I would sort of physically head the ball, either flick it on or bring it down or head it back. And I was naturally aggressive. I wouldn't say I was nasty. You know, we might go on to the Eyal Berkovic incident later on, you know. And I think with that incident, I always say, you know, I'd spent 20 years, 15 years trying to build up a reputation of being not only, you look at it, George Graham bought me for my physicality at 19. Joe Kinnear took me to Luton. George Graham, I worked with Arsene Wenger, Martin O'Neill signed me, Harry Redknapp signed me, some of the biggest managers in the game signed John Hartson. They didn't sign me for, I was quick and I run the channels and I had, you know, I could take 6 or 7 players on and pass the ball. They signed me because they saw somebody that would give everything, somebody that would battle with defenders. He'd be a focal point. He'd be our main man to hit up front. He had good feet. He could head the ball and he could score goals. So my game was based around my physicality. Now I'm not saying I wanted to hurt people, but I went out onto the pitch very physical. I was up for the challenge, and I didn't fear. I didn't fear them challenges even from a very young age. I don't think it's nasty. I just think it's. People feared you. You wanted to put fear into the centre halves, if you like. That's what I wanted, and I think I did that lots of times.
Did you win any in the tunnel? Did you think, like, last time I did this guy and I can see he's not ready? In the tunnel, did you look and think, yeah, I got this guy?
Well, I used to have a look at the players and, you know, you used to think, oh, maybe I could get the better of him or that. But the other thing was as well, Graham, which is interesting, I didn't ever talk to players. I never spoke to the opposition. You know, I never tried to intimidate them by any language or speaking. I always felt if I spoke to them, it would affect my game. I was like a silent assassin, if you like. I'd be silent, you know, and then I'd knock them over. I'd pick them back up. Always pick them back up because you felt the referee might give you a bit of sympathy and you get away with a booking, you know. If you went and beat somebody in the air, then he fell on the floor. If you picked the lad up, and the referee probably let you off for that, rather than if you snarl at them over them, then he might give you a yellow card. But I never liked the verbals. I never ever spoke to the opposition players. I just like to go and do it, you know, as it came along.
When you were still very young, just 20, Arsenal's run to the Cup Winners' Cup, which we'll come to in a minute, meant that you played the UEFA Super Cup and you'd pleased and impressed first George Graham and then his assistant, Stuart Houston, so much that you were easily Arsenal's first choice striker. And the Super Cups against AC Milan, in the days when they're still immensely powerful, they've got world-class footballers everywhere.
Won the European Cup in '94, didn't he?
Yeah, so they're European Cup winners. Now, tell me when you go up at that age and that raw, for all your physicality and for all your promising talent, you went up against, if I'm not wrong, Desai and Costa Curta, both at Highbury and in San Siro. How ready were you? Did people give you notes on them? I know I'm asking you to go back a long way, but also, I mean, they were just outstanding. They were truly, in Costa Curta's, in my impression, John, he was a defender's defender, always alert. He was an Anglophile. He loved English football, which is why the Italians call him Billy Costa Curta. Desai in that era was one of, he literally was one of the great European footballers of the previous 20 years, and he remained so. He didn't put a foot wrong in the final until the final in '98 and winning the World Cup. He was the player of the tournament for me, way beyond Zidane. At 20, at barely just turned 20, were you ready for them? What did you learn from them? What was the experience like?
Well, first and foremost, Graham, I had to be ready because as far as I was concerned, we'd lost two centre forwards. Alan Smith had retired. Alan Smith, the year before, scored the winning goal against Parma in Malmo. Arsenal won the Cup Winners' Cup. That's why we met. Cup winners faced the European champions, and we met in what we call the Super Cup. And the first game at Highbury was Paul Merson's comeback game, having been in a priory for so long. And we drew 0-0 at Highbury. Then we go over to the San Siro, and we get beat 2-0. But I felt as if I did very well. It was actually Costa Curta and Baresi. They were the two centre-halves. Desai played in the middle of the park alongside Maldini played left back. And I just felt, because I was so young and I was just so fresh and I was just enjoying it. You know, I hadn't ever heard of Costa Curta, or you remember a year and a half prior to that, I'm just coming out to Luton's first team, you know, in the old first division. So I'm playing against Barnsley, and all of a sudden my move to Arsenal happens very quick. With all due respect, I know who they are now because they're absolute magnificent Italian superstars, World Cup winners, Champions League winners, retired the Maldini shirt, number 3 shirt, you know, for AC Milan. But at that particular time, I was so young, I was so fresh that George Graham used to just say to me, he used to say, "Big man," excuse my Scottish accent, but
that was George. You got him in one.
My wife is Scottish, so I've been learning a bit. He used to go, "Big man, win your headers," and he said, "and relax, just relax, win your headers, big man, and calm down." Right? That's what he used to say to me. And all I had to do, because Alan Smith he won the Golden Boot twice at Arsenal. He was a magnificent centre forward. You know, they'd had great success under Smudger. And I think George, with myself, I don't know whether I was a replacement for Smudger, but I was just somebody that he spent a lot of money on. I was Britain's most expensive teenager at 19 years of age, 2.5 million I went to Arsenal for. I think he had someone who was young, who was going to be around a long time, and I was incredibly aggressive and enthusiastic. And when I would imagine that when Costa Curta and Baresi see me running at them, young, no fear, I had no fear whatsoever, and I'm looking to head the ball, and they're probably thinking, "Oh my God, I'm not getting into this wild animal's way here." And that's what I was like. So with all due respect, you know, I had great respect for them as time went on. And it was interesting because we played AC Milan for Celtic in the Champions League qualifiers again around about 2004, 2005. And Costa Curta played, right? And as I'm walking off the pitch, I've gone to shake his hand, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you still playing?" And I thought, "You cheeky so-and-so," because he was older than me.
He was about 43 by then.
That's what he said to me. He said, "Are you still playing?" I went, what was it? You still playing?
See, John, that's the class of us. That's him getting in your head for the next time in case there's another next time. That's the psychology of a defender.
And that's what he said to me. So I remember Maldini played that night as well. Baresi had retired by then. But no, they were just great times. Almost thrown into a Super Cup final, and then the year after, I think, or it might have been the same year, we played in the Cup Winners' Cup final. You know, so I think people sometimes, you know, overlook the fact I'm only 20 years of age, Graham, and I've played in 2 European finals. You know, which when you look back now, it was remarkable times, you know, then.
You've made the jump from Luton to Arsenal, but I want to sort of expand that jump because, when you're playing, let's say at 19, I think I got your age wrong. I think it's 19 against Milan and then 20 by the time you face Zaragoza the year. So at 19, you're about 5-6 years away from watching games at Swansea, watching games at the Vetchfield, and going down there, and before you're on the train up and down to Luton. And I just wonder, this is a pure self-indulgence, John, and if it's a player that you didn't like or don't remember, then you can give me a little shrug and roll me and bully me physically. But you were able to watch a great hero of mine when I was growing up, Tommy Hutchinson.
Oh, class. Tommy Hutchinson played on the left, cut inside, cut back. He'd have driven me mad because I wanted the ball crossed in. But he could cut back, and he was a wonderful winger. And he was doing it in his 40s at Swansea, Graham. And I was only watching a video the other week when he scored in the FA Cup final for Man City. And then he scored that own goal in the same game. So, sorry for interrupting, but Tommy Hutchinson was somebody I stood on the North Bank at 10, 11, 12 years of age at the old Vetchfield with my father, watching Tommy Hutchinson, Bob Latchford, Alan Curtis, Leighton James, Robbie James, Jeremy Charles, Di Davis in goal, Adji Abdic. Swansea were just my life at the time, and the North Bank was somewhere where my dad would take me. And it's always stayed with me. I'm born and bred in Swansea. And at that time, under John Toshak, what a team they had. People forget that some of the names that you've been mentioning, that Leighton James was a fantastic footballer for Burnley. And he used to have I remember reading in Shoot, like these were the innocent days that they were like, how do you manage to go out for a night or out for the papers and not be, so I just put on, and he had a big Elvis Costello National Health glasses. He said, I just put on my glasses and nobody recognises me at different times. He was class for Burnley as well, wasn't he? He was fantastic for Burnley. And Di Davis, people forget about what a brilliant, because he was a Wales international goalkeeper for many, many years as well. And I also watched Swansea then, the next team from that, which was Dudley Lewis, it was Andy Melville, Chris Coleman at left back, players like Paul Rayner, Jimmy Gilligan, just players. John Yogi Hughes in due course, and John came there. So that Swansea side took you to Europe because you had the famous games against Panathinaikos, didn't you? Yeah, well, the fans got arrested, didn't they? They got held in Panathinaikos, and but I think it was 3-3. It was, one of the giants of European football, and you get them at the Vetch. What did it feel like? It was just incredible because the Vetch used to host the Welsh internationals as well. It hasn't hosted one for a while now. The Liberty Stadium has, but the old Vetchfield used to as well. So they were great games. Swansea in Europe, we just couldn't believe it. And the good thing about Swansea in recent times, they've had some really talented managers. I think they slipped out of the Premier League. They had 7 seasons in the Premier League, under Roberto Martinez. Brendan Rodgers took us into the Premier League, but then left for Liverpool. They'd have had a League Cup final as well, wouldn't they? Did they know? A League Cup final under Michael Laudrup, of course, beating Bradford 5-0. The first proper trophy Swansea had won, in the history, I believe, the Capital One Cup, I think it was called, Graham. And they played some brilliant football on their way to this progress, and they've slipped out now. And it's American-based owned club, and they've got a lot of shares, and it almost seemed to sell every asset. You look at last season, Daniel James went, McBurney went, the two Ayala brothers both went at one stage, but one of the Ayalas is back at the minute. Andre Ayala, is there right now, but they become a bit of a selling club, as if they're trying to make some of the money back on the assets. But you grew up in different days when the Vetchfield was muddy, when it was largely, it would have been aggressive, it would have been very proud, locally noisy. They might not have hit the heights, but I think you get taught as a person by the club that you begin watching at. I think you get taught by the atmosphere, by the people around you, by the players you see in front of you. I don't just mean a football club. What did it help make you growing up in Swansea in the 70s and 80s? Specifically, ideas, values, attitudes, behaviour. What has it left you with throughout your career? Graham, I was a fan. I was an avid avid Swansea City fan, and I would watch players from the North Bank, and it'd be 4,500 people there. That was the crowds. It wasn't much bigger than that, 6 or 7 maybe. And I always loved it when the centre forward scored and then ran to the crowd, because I'd be in that crowd, and if you ran towards it just gives you that, wow, what's a feeling. And the centre forwards back then, as I says, it was like Paul Rayner scored a lot of goals. I don't want to go into the recently when it was Lee Trundle, Jason Scotland, obviously of late, recently McBurney, players like this. I loved the Swans when I was growing up, when I was 13, 14, 15 years of age. And it does really make you feel that I've always appreciated the fans. I've always had time for the fans of clubs that I've played for. You know, West Ham is a great crowd. Upton Park was a brilliant place to play. And if you notice, a lot of my goals, when I did score, I ran to the crowd. I ran to the crowd, that elation. And when you run, not so much, I ran into them a few times, but I'd have to avoid them and stay a certain, distance away. But they were great days, listening to the chants and everything, to the opposition fans. But as I said, I grew up on the terraces, and then I lived the dream. I went on to become a professional myself.
Without stepping out of bounds, and tell me if I do, but your mum worked in a psychiatric unit, is that right?
My mother worked as a psychiatric nurse for 22 years, in a psychiatric hospital.
If I make a comparison, over here, Gerard Piqué made a lot of the fact that when his mum worked in a spinal unit where people were trying to be rehabilitated as much as they could from car crashes and motorbike crashes, his mum used to take him in to say, look, kid, this is what life can give you. Make the most of everything all the time. Was there an equivalent? I don't necessarily mean a visit, but was there an equivalent whereby your mum's experiences and what she lived through left her teaching you and telling you certain things?
Well, my mum, the hospital that she worked in, I try to say this with all due respect to the patients and the people that were there, they were taken off the streets because they were a danger to society. They were psychotic. And my mother worked as a night nurse. She used to get training in karate, my mother, as a nurse, because they had to give them training to deal with the patients if there ever was a problem. And I remember one Sunday afternoon, there was a patient. My mother said, all he's talking about, John, is you. He loves football and he wants to meet you. And I'd never been there in 21 years while my mother worked there. I was only about my late teens. But my mum she worked there for a long time. And I went in there and she introduced me to this gentleman. And, he was pretty much, shook his hand and everything else. But I couldn't believe that my mum had put herself in a situation, night shift, where for me a lot of strange things happen in the night, Graham. From 1 o'clock till 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, it's airy, and my mum was up there looking after people that weren't allowed out onto the streets, psychiatric nurse. Anything could have happened. She was so brave to do that. And I used to think to myself, I came away thinking, my mum, not that she had to, I love my mum, I still do to this day, but she went up in my estimation so far for the job and the work that she did by being at that hospital as working a night shift 2 or 3 nights a week. And then she'd come home in the morning and she'd have to go into bed and she'd get us all ready for school. And my mum would generally then go and sleep a few hours in the day. We'd all be in school because she'd obviously done the night shift. And, the job that she did up there, she came away in the end because she had an accident. I won't really go into it, but she had an accident. No. And then my dad almost said to her, right, you're not going back up there.
Did you ask her if she was scared? Did you ask her if she felt fear? Or was her professionalism and her training so much that she felt that they needed her? What was
it was that way. They needed her. She couldn't be scared. Even if she was scared, she couldn't show that she was scared because that was her job. That's what she signed up to do. If people she could have got attacked. Somebody could have picked up a knife. They could have ganged up towards her, anything else. But she was loved up there. She had a wonderful relationship with the patients. She was a fantastic nurse. And obviously, that's my mother. So I maybe grown up with that sort of mental resilience, if you like, about seeing my mother and obviously realising what she'd done, and the respect there was enormous.
Paint me a picture, John, paint me a picture of a man that is legendary. He's probably a little bit less well known for his football, but Mick Harford. Mick Harford, there are certain people in football who carry a reputation for this or that. It might be humour. It might be an ability to live mental at night time, go crazy and still be brilliant on it.
Yeah.
There are people like Ricky Carvalho, who Benny McCarthy told me, useless in training, shit in training, Saturday 8 out of 10. Mick Harford carries one of those reputations because he's reputed to be just about the hardest man that played football in living memory. He becomes not just the guy to whom you're apprenticed, but in theory, the apprentice system then was supposed to be, and in the series we've covered all the bullying and the do this and the do that. You were supposed to learn. You were supposed to duplicate your senior pros' actions. So 2 things in this stream, and I want to really paint a picture. Tell us about Mick Harford, the man, the footballer, and tell us about the process of being supposed to serve him, which is what an apprentice was supposed to do, but learn from him too.
Mick Harford is what I would call an icon, along with Ian Rush, different players, was my idol growing up. I watched Rushy, obviously, but never got around him. When I joined Luton, Mick, not only was he a legendary figure, he was a magnificent centre-forward. Now, Mick was different to me. Mick wanted to hurt people, and he played in an era where he's going up against the likes of Brian Kilcline, Sam Allardyce, Alvin Martin, Alan MacDonald from QPR, Northern Ireland, a monster of a man. And it was even worse, the battles then. It was elbows up, a free-for-all at times. In the 80s, you see, not mentioned the Billy Whitehursts and them type of players. And we spoke about my aggression, and I worked for Mick for 2 years. I worked under him in terms of watching his every move, how he would lead the line, how he would get across people and take the ball down into his chest. And
John, that's it's a technical term, and occasionally in the series we stop. People who listen to this love football, but pretend you're explaining to a 16-year-old junior and he's your apprentice. When you say get across, physically, what does that mean?
Well, what it means is you have to be in front of the defender when the ball, when a midfielder is looking to play it into the centre forward. There's no point being behind the defender unless you want to run in behind, like a Craig Bellamy. Craig Bellamy very seldom came short. He used to play on defenders' shoulders and run in behind. He never wanted to come short because he give the defenders a chance to kick him and to win the ball. But Craig used to run in behind. Michael Owen was the same. Michael, a lot of the time, played on players' shoulders, and they would run in behind. And the one thing defenders hate, Graham, is running back towards their own goal. That's what they don't like to do. That they like to play with the play in front of them. But as a centre forward, good centre forwards like Alan Shearer, who I admired, you've got to get your team up the pitch, right? If the team are defending, and you've got to be an out ball, you've got to be a focal point. So when that ball comes into you from the right back or the left back or the midfielders, you've got to be there first. It can't come straight back in, so you're under pressure again. So you've got to get across that defender, come across his blind side, if you like, and arrive at the right time. So you can either bring it down, take a touch, or if somebody's on, you can play it back first time. That's if you've got a decent touch. Mick and we had a good touch. So generally the managers like you to take a touch